listening to the Big Blue Marble Podcast with Anwar Knight.
The wind is whipping stronger than it has in the last 24 hours. It is unbelievable.
We've seen awnings go flying. We've seen light-up shades go flying. So this is quite a storm here on Daytona Beach.
I don't need to state the obvious here, but we are officially in hurricane conditions. Wow, that was a heck of a gust.
Anything that was on this coast within 20 minutes just now is gone, is going to be washed away.
It just stings every time when these gusts come through. Hold on.
You know, that could be the slogan for this year's Atlantic hurricane season. Hold on. Those were snippets from various networks covering some of the hurricanes over the last several weeks. Just incredible stuff. Hold on, indeed. It has been a hell of a ride. And, you know, just saying it has been record-breaking doesn't do it justice. The devil is in the details. Where do we begin? The fact that 22 named storms were the earliest to form on record this season. So far, 10 named storms have made U.S. landfall, the most ever in a season. In September alone, 3 Atlantic named storms formed in just 6 hours. Researchers say that you need to head back more than a century to find a record to match it. That is 3 storms forming on the same calendar day. It has been such an active season that we've run out of names. The official name list, coordinated by the World Meteorological Organization, they're the keeper of the names. They have 6 master lists of 21 names, and they are recycled every 6 years. All based on our phonetic alphabet, although for the record, the letters Q, U, X, Y, or Z, Z for our American friends, it's not used. Those letters they don't go with because it's just too challenging to come up with names routinely. So now we're using the backup list, which is the Greek alphabet. We've only used Greek letters to name hurricanes one other time in recorded history, and that was in 2005. That year, they had 28 named storms. And by the way, they get names simply because it's easier to track them, especially when you have more than one. And in the 1950s, it was actually only female names that were used, but it eventually prompted an outcry. Women were saying, hey, these are monster storms that are killing people. Let's make this an equal opportunity of destruction. So eventually both male and female names started being used, and they just alternate them now. But what's really interesting here, a study not long ago carried out by U.S. researchers found that Americans are less afraid of hurricanes with female names. They were not as willing to seek shelter or evacuate. And maybe Hurricane Katrina changed that. By the way, you will never hear about another Hurricane Katrina. You see, if the storm is especially destructive or deadly, they retire that name. It never comes back. Anyway, speaking of names, mine is Anwar Knight. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for finding us and listening in. It is so great to have your company, especially these days. There's just so much going on in our lives. I hope you and your family are doing well. This podcast is all about our changing planet. It's an opportunity to explore together what's happening, learn on how we can make a difference for the better, and meet some fascinating people that are already trying to save our planet. And today is no exception. We have a real cool guest that will join me. He is an aerospace engineer with NOAA, that is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. They are an American-based organization, and I'm simplifying it here, but they are scientists and researchers that study the skies and the oceans. And incidentally, the science can be very precise. You know, for a hurricane to form in the first place, the ocean water temperature has to be at least 26.5 degrees Celsius. That's around 80 Fahrenheit. If it's a degree cooler, it's not happening. But these days, with our warming waters, Nick Underwood has been very busy. Nick is a part of NOAA's Hurricane Hunter team. They routinely fly into the most violent storms on Earth. They spend hours in a rotating mass of wind and rain that forms over the tropical waters of the Atlantic, and some can climb sometimes 60,000 feet up, making them, in every sense of the word, monster storms. What keeps the plane from falling apart? What do they do up there? And what is it like? Let's find out as we fly into the eye of the storm on this edition of the Big Blue Marble Podcast.
Have a question, comment, or show idea? Let us know at bigbluemarble.earth.
Nick Underwood is my guest today. He is an aerospace engineer who joins us from the state of Florida, where he is a part of a very highly specialized team, the NOAA Hurricane Hunters. Nick, I know it's been a crazy busy time, this season in particular, so thanks for making some time for us today.
Yeah, happy to be here.
You know, one of the top fears for people is flying. And if you don't mind flying, you still very likely dread any sort of turbulence on a flight. I know I do. But you guys are, in essence, looking for it, or at the very least, expecting it. So I think you really have to be a certain kind of person to want to do this. So what draws you to it?
So what's funny is that, 5 years ago, I didn't know this job existed. And now I'm 4 years into it, and it's tough to imagine really doing anything else. And really, there's just this sense of what we're doing up there is actually very important to people back on the ground. And, it matters to not only our own communities, but communities, across the United States and even in countries down in the Caribbean. And so really, there's that sense of adventure to it, and there's that sense of we're going to get into some rough stuff, but it's going to be for a good cause.
So no regrets then, at least at this point?
None at all. After my first flight was into Hurricane Matthew in 2016, and I certainly wasn't physically or mentally prepared for that one, but every flight since then I have been ready to go.
Well, tell me about that. When you say you weren't prepared, I mean, obviously there's going to be a first time for everyone when you do what you guys do. What struck you the most? What do you remember most about that one?
So I was informed that I was going to be on the flight just about 12 hours beforehand, and it was a night flight. So we were taking off at 2 a.m., and I had just slept, my full 8 hours the night before, and so I had to go back home, rest up, and, I've got the excitement flowing. I'm going to go on my first hurricane flight, and so obviously couldn't get back to sleep. And by the time the mission actually rolled around, I was just an observer, so I was sitting in the back watching the folks who had done this stuff for years do what they do, and I was fine for probably the first 2 hours, and then after that, I think the combination of being tired and being in, that kind of turbulence just kind of got to me.
Does that mean that you needed a bag?
I needed a bag or two.
Well, there it is. It's a real dedicated group that make this all work, and I realize that. But when a team takes to the air now, how many of you are on board, and can you give us a breakdown sort of their specialty?
Sure. So on a typical flight, we're operating with reduced crews this year due to the pandemic, trying to reduce spread amongst ourselves. But on a typical year, on a typical mission flight, on the P3s that we fly directly into the storms, there's usually about 12 to 15 people. There are 3 pilots up front flying the aircraft, keeping us safe. There are 2 flight engineers, and those are folks that will sit in between the pilots, operate some of the subsystems. They'll control the throttles while we're flying through the storms. We have a flight director on board. There are onboard meteorologists, so they're looking at the radars, talking with the scientists in the back, helping the pilots find their way through the nastier parts of the storm. We have a navigator who is plotting up our tracks. They're helping the pilots work the radios. Going further back through the tube, we've got several scientists from the National Hurricane Center on board, and they're operating different science instruments, looking at data as it's coming in as we're collecting it. And then there's also a handful of technicians and engineers like myself that are operating data systems, launching expendables out of the aircraft, and really just taking care of everything else that needs taken care of.
It's quite a team. I didn't know there was that many people on each flight. And you're in charge of and I hope I get this right, it's the Airborne Vertical Atmospheric Profiling System known as the AVAPS.
AVAPs, yes, that is correct.
Oh, sorry, I don't have the lingo down. The AVAPs.
It's okay.
But that's actually, really one of the keys to this mission, because you basically drop a tube filled with little electronics into the Hurricane called a dropson, right?
That's correct. So you think of dropsons like weather balloons in reverse. So it's a sensor packet, but instead of being attached to a balloon and floating up through the atmosphere, this one has a parachute, and we launch it out of the bottom of the aircraft, and the parachute deploys, and as it's floating down, it's collecting temperature, pressure, humidity, wind speed, wind direction, all of those parameters that are really important in determining how strong a hurricane is and where it's going to end up going. And so on a typical mission flight, we'll launch usually about 20 to 30 of these instruments all throughout the storm, just sampling different parts of the atmosphere and getting those atmospheric profiles.
And for our listeners' benefit, for those who may not be familiar with that term, dropson, you mentioned it's like a weather balloon in reverse. So just so everyone knows, routinely, still to this very day, there are weather balloons with a sonde or a small tube or package attached to it, and they're released into the atmosphere across many parts of the world. We still actively rely on that method to get real-time data that helps put together everyday forecasts. Of course, it's supplemented by satellites and radar and computer programs, all that sort of thing. But they fill a balloon with helium and they launch it. And as it ascends, it collects data electronically, and then eventually that balloon will pop, and a little parachute provides a slow descent down to the ground. Same idea here, but in this case, as you described, Nick, these sensor packs are dropped in flight into a hurricane, so it's a dropson. And as it descends, it's taking measurements, nonstop. And it's quite remarkable, really, to think some of the most valuable data is collected from a relatively simple device. Many of these are made from cardboard, but inside is the payload. And Nick, how big are these?
It's a little bit longer than a Pringles can and about the same diameter as one.
And when do they get deployed? Is there a certain time frame or height level that you need to reach before you drop them while you're inside a hurricane?
So prior to each mission flight, we will get sent a series of points that we are supposed to drop at. And the flight director will brief those to me prior to the flight, and then they'll also be calling for those drops throughout the flight. And I back them up because they're insanely busy looking at radars and doing a bunch of other stuff. So we get sent those points prior. Sometimes scientists on board will want some extra sondes thrown out. For example, if we're in the eye wall of the hurricane and there's some really good wind data that they want to get as much of that collected as they can, they'll request a few extra, ad hoc dropsons to be sent out. But for the most part, the points are predetermined. Typically, on a pass through the storm, you'll do an endpoint, a midpoint, a drop at the center of the storm, right in the eye, and then a midpoint and the endpoint going out.
So there's literally a little chute, a little trap door or something that you drop these through, right?
Yeah, so P-3s were initially a Navy aircraft, and they would launch, sounding instruments out the bottom to look for enemy submarines. But we use those same tubes to launch science instruments that collect profiles of ocean temperature, that we launch the dropsons to collect profiles of the atmosphere. So, you've got this platform that was used for something, but we're just using it as a science platform.
Mm-hmm. And it's quite remarkable. You mentioned the planes. So these are the Lockheed Orion 4-engine turboprops, right?
That's correct.
And they have been used in missions for over 40 years with this organization. And I have to wonder, are they modified structurally? I mean, they're not new aircraft, and you're really putting them to the test. Is there any structural advancements put onto it to withstand for these flights?
So we get asked that question all the time. The two P-3s that we have were made specially for NOAA in the mid-1970s. And the only modifications that have been made to these aircraft, on the tail, there is a large bulb that has been put there that houses a radar system that we carry. Mm-hmm. The floor has been structurally reinforced because we have some very heavy science equipment racks that we put in. But outside of those two modifications, everything else on that P3 is the same as you would find on a Navy P3 Charlie.
And no concerns.
These are aging aircraft, but we have some of the best maintainers in the business, and the guys on the ground absolutely take pristine care of those aircraft. And as old as they are, every time I step on that aircraft, I feel comfortable and confident that they have taken good care of it.
Well, the track record is certainly a testament to that, isn't it? There's not been a single incident, and they've been in the air for decades, so bravo. But in addition to the sensor packets that are released, these planes are actually outfitted with a host of probes and gadgets. So what else does the team utilize in flight during each mission?
Yeah, so these really are flying research laboratories, pretty much. So in addition to launching the dropsondes and collecting those atmospheric profiles, we have 3 radar systems on board. There's one in the nose, there's one in a large, we call it the M&M fairing on the bottom of the aircraft, and then there's that tail Doppler radar that's in that bulb that I just talked about. That was one of the modifications for the aircraft. So we've got those going through the entire flight. They're collecting radar data. The TDR, that tail Doppler radar, is very important for the folks at the National Hurricane Center, especially the folks at the Hurricane Research Division. They're really using that data to improve those forecast models. In addition to the radars, we've also got an instrument called the Step Frequency Microwave Radar, or the SMRF, and that actually looks at sea surface states below us to calculate surface winds. We have a series of probes out on the wing that are cloud physics probes, so they're looking at water droplet speed and direction and size as we're flying through these rain bands. So there really is just a whole host of data that this aircraft is collecting as it's flying along, and every bit of that data is valuable.
But where does it all end up, Nick? Is the data analyzed on the aircraft? Is it sent down electronically to the ground? Or is it actually a combination of both?
So we do have those scientists on board from the National Hurricane Center that will fly with us, and they'll look at that data in real time, especially from the dropsondes. They'll do some quality control on it, make sure that those instruments, those sensor packets, are collecting the information that they're supposed to, and then we are sending that data off as soon as it's collected via satellite to the National Hurricane Center, because those model runs want the freshest, want the newest, the most up-to-date data available, and we're out there collecting that for them.
Mm-hmm. And at what point do you guys get the call? When do the hunters take to the air?
So as soon as a system out in the Atlantic or in the Caribbean looks like it's going to develop into something, if you start seeing the convection, if you start seeing that rotation start to form, we'll get sent out. Our partners at the 53rd Weather Reconnaissance Squadron, the Air Force Reservists, they'll typically get sent out first to do some low-level invest to really see if those systems are going to start to developing. But once they do start cooking into tropical depressions, tropical storms, we'll get deployed out to start flying those reconnaissance missions.
So you may get called out even before it reaches name status.
Oh, absolutely. So if you look at Hurricane Laura just this year, we forward deployed out to St. Croix and first flew a mission into that system when it was still just Tropical Depression 13, I think. And then on that flight, we found winds stronger than we expected, and turns out it was Tropical Storm Laura.
And that's the nature of the beast, isn't it? It's always evolving, making what you do even more important. Now, do you always fly towards the center of each hurricane and out the other side? Or is there a predetermined flight path?
So on the P3s, we do have certain flight patterns that we'll fly. Typically, we'll fly what's called a butterfly or a figure 4 pattern, where we'll go in the storm on one side, fly a straight line through to the other side, make a turn, and then fly back through, usually at a 90-degree angle from that previous track we just flew through. And we'll do that a couple more times. Typically on a flight, you'll fly through about 3 or 4 times, depending on how much gas you have and how close the storm is to land.
And at what height would you be flying at?
That aircraft does fly directly through the storms, usually between 8,000 to 10,000 feet above the water. We also have a Gulfstream 4, which is our high-altitude surveillance jet. So that aircraft is flying up above, around, and in front of the storms, sampling the high altitude winds and pressures and temperatures that really end up steering where these storms go. And so when you have the combination of those two aircraft flying, the forecasters really get a clear picture of not just the storm itself, but the environment that it is in that's going to allow it to progress on.
Now, take us into the center of the storm. We often hear that the eye of the storm is a clear void, calm and serene. Is that the norm?
So especially with the more powerful storms, once you get to the major category, so Category 3 and above, you do see the eye really clear out. You will get blue skies above, and you'll get what's called the stadium effect, which is, we're flying down at 8,000 feet, and these cloud tops are reaching up to 30, 40, 50,000 feet, and it looks like, you're on the field of a football stadium. And to get there, you do have to go through the eye wall, which is the worst part of the storm. But that eye wall is directly adjacent to the eye. And so you'll get the worst of the bumps, and then you'll break into the eye, and it's just like being on a calm commercial flight again, until you have to go back through the eye wall again, of course.
So what is that like when you are flying into that eye wall? And I should point out, I posted pictures and some cool video for our listeners in this episode's show notes, as well as on our YouTube channel. Be sure to check it out. You can see for yourself what the eye is like and just how much these Hunter aircraft bob up and down. It really is quite a ride in there. How would you describe it, Nick, as you punch into the most intense part of a hurricane?
I always liken it to being on a wooden roller coaster. So you've got a lot of vibration. You've got, these strong up and down bumps. Sometimes you'll get tossed to the sides. We have seat belts on every seat. We're always strapped in to keep ourselves from going flying across the aircraft. So it certainly is a bumpy ride. And out the window, there's just wind and rain, and it's just slapping against the windows. I always liken that to if you've gone through an automatic car wash and you've got the cleaners, slapping against the windows and everything. That's about how it looks outside, but you just combine that with the feeling and sensation of being on a wooden roller coaster.
So would there be at times, I guess, depending on the intensity of the storm, would there be a sudden drop? Could you hit a pocket and drop down?
There are pretty strong updrafts and downdrafts all throughout the storm, and sometimes you will hit some of those, and you'll get that feeling of your stomach going up into your throat, or you'll get the feeling of being pushed down into your seat. But the pilots and the flight engineers up front, they're really working to prevent as many of those from happening as possible, because you're trying to reduce stress on the aircraft. So the pilots are focused on keeping the aircraft level, keeping us at the altitude we want, and the flight engineers, they're looking at our airspeed, and they're adjusting the throttles as we're flying through to account for those updrafts and downdrafts.
So needless to say, when the fasten the seatbelt sign starts to blink, it doesn't come off once you guys take flight, right?
Exactly. You definitely want to stay in your seat while it's on.
Wow. And now this might be a stupid question, but when you're flying in a storm, can you feel the difference between a Category 4 storm like Hurricane Delta versus Hurricane Hannah, which was a Category 1 this season?
You really can. And what you'll find is that the tropical storms and Category 1 storms tend to be a little more violent to fly through than the bigger, more established major hurricanes. And I think that's because they're still trying to get their act together. And so when you've got those major storms, all the winds are flowing the same direction, and you can more easily account for those as you're flying through. But with the tropical storms and the Category 1 storms, they tend to surprise us a little more with the bumps.
Yeah, you see, I would have never guessed that, but it makes sense when you say it. I'm curious, though, going back to the center or the eye of the storm, when you confirm that it's relatively calm, there's some blue sky, and I think for the average person that's hard to picture, and maybe in part because we don't really have a true sense of the size here. We have no way to relate to that. And I think it's worth a mention that, the eye of a storm, depending on the overall size of the hurricane, it can range from 30 to 65 kilometers across, 20 to 40 miles. And I mention that because I'm wondering, at that point in the flight, does it provide a brief moment of downtime for the crew?
So typically, we don't have that much time when we're in the eye. Typically, once we break in, we'll actually start the hunting process of all of this, which is where the flight director is looking at our flight level winds, and they're wanting those to get down to 0, because at that point, we've found the true center of that circulation where all of that energy is trying to flow to. And at that point, we'll launch a drop sonde, we'll mark that as the center, and then we'll get on a track to head back out. It's really when we're outside of the eye, around the storm, that we have a chance to, get up out of the seat, go to the bathroom, grab your lunch, whatever you need before we head back in on our next pass.
And your crews only fly when the storm was over water, is that correct?
That's correct. And we get asked that question a lot. And the reasoning is that once a storm is over land, you've got folks on the ground who can launch weather balloons. You've got ground-based radars. What these aircraft provide is that kind of data collection in an area where you don't have those established, which is out over the ocean.
Right. Is there a final call on when you're able to fly into a hurricane?
Typically, we try to fly them right up until landfall. And, it's always based on how fast the storm is moving and when it's going to make landfall relative to when we've been taking off for flights. And typically, we'll finish up our flights shortly before it does make landfall. Sometimes we'll still go out and fly what we call shore patrol missions, which is where you're still sampling like the parts of the storm that are still out over the water. But typically, once they make landfall, we're finished with them at that point.
Yeah. So for the most part, the air mission concludes, but up until that point, the team is feeding vital real-time storm data, which is crucial when it comes to assembling the most accurate forecast of a hurricane, where it's going to go and how strong it's going to be, right?
Exactly. Without that in situ data, that data from the actual storm environment, you can only get so much information from remote observations, whether that's satellites or whether that's radar systems on the ground as these storms pass by islands or something like that. But really getting that in situ data, that information that comes from truly the heart of these things, is really what is able for those. It's really what makes those models viable, to where we can get that track accurate, where we can forecast what intensity it's going to be when it makes landfall. And there certainly have been a lot of advancements over the last few decades. We're very, very good at predicting the track of these storms now. For example, I think Hurricane Laura made landfall only a handful of miles from where it was forecast to 72 hours in advance. And so, the more time that we can buy for the folks on the ground to know that a storm is headed their way, the more people you can keep out of harm's way, the more dollars you can save. And really, that's what we're looking for is to keep people safe on the ground.
And you guys are doing that. Really, I've been covering the Atlantic hurricane season for years, and it is astounding how accurate the forecasts are getting. This season alone, as you know, Hurricane Laura, it made landfall within 1 mile of where it was forecasted to. And I think it's a combination of advancing science, technology, and then certainly skills, which NOAA has been front and center of. To think a 5-day hurricane track forecast today is as accurate as a 3-day one was in 2001. So it has come a long way. But it doesn't mean your job's getting any easier. As I mentioned, this has been a punishing season. A record-breaking 10 storms have made U.S. landfall so far. So I wanted to get your take on where things are going. There is increasing evidence that hurricanes are now intensifying more quickly, which ultimately means a greater number of Cat 4 and Cat 5 storms. Hurricane Delta alone this year, it went from a tropical storm to a Cat 4 storm in just over 30 hours. That is remarkable rapid intensification, and it's being linked to the warming of the atmosphere and ocean. Seemingly, the burning of fossil fuels is making conditions ripe for more fierce and more destructive hurricanes. And you guys have had a front row seat to these changes. You are in it. You're forecasting it, you're analyzing it, you're comparing it. So what are your thoughts on this alarming trend?
So there's certainly a wealth of research that is going into establishing that link right now. I know specifically NOAA's Geophysical Fluid Dynamics Laboratory in their latest and greatest outlooks for the rest of the 21st century, they are anticipating a likely increase in tropical cyclone intensity, a likely increase in tropical cyclone rainfall rates, a likely increase in the number of cyclones that reach major hurricane status, Category 4, Category 5. And so there really does seem to be that correlation of warming ocean temperatures, warming atmospheres that are going to fuel more powerful storms. From my personal perspective, just as an engineer, when I look at a system, and if the water is warmer, that's just more energy available for these systems to come over and suck up into the atmosphere and become more powerful storms. So certainly it does look that way. And, as we continue to gather data on this stuff, and as the scientists at NOAA continue to work on these models and analyze that data, I'm sure that linkage will become clearer and clearer.
And hopefully sooner than later. The reality is hurricanes are one of, if not the deadliest and costliest disasters to impact the U.S. I strongly believe that the only way to reduce future warming and the intensity of tomorrow's storms is by reducing the burning of fossil fuels, while at the same time nurturing more efficient renewable energy options. But let's leave that there. I want to end on a fun note with the remaining moments. I have to ask you, Nick, about the names of the planes. I'm sure a lot of people don't know this, but the planes that you fly in have been nicknamed Miss Piggy, Kermit, and Gonzo. So how did that come about? And I ask because here you are flying into monster storms, and you're doing so sitting in Kermit.
So, like I said, these airplanes, at least Kermit and Miss Piggy, are two P3s. They rolled off the assembly line in the mid-1970s, and we actually have an agreement with the Jim Henson Company to use those names for these aircraft. And Gonzo, our Gulfstream 4, came online in the late 90s, and they figured, well, it's a hurricane hunting aircraft. We'll continue the trend and also give that aircraft a Muppet name. So,
well, maybe a good distraction at times, because these flights are long, aren't they?
Yeah. Typically, it's about 8 hours in the air. On a longer P3 flight, you can push closer to 9, but 8 hours is, a typical full day. So when you go fly these missions, it is a full day of work, because usually it's about 2 hours of pre-flighting the aircraft, getting all of our instruments ready to go, making sure the aircraft's ready to go. Then you've got 8 hours in the air, and then there's usually about an hour and a half of post-flight duties of, just making sure things are ready to go for the next crew to go up. So it really is, it's a long day, and we'll fly missions as many as 6 days in a row before taking a day down.
Wow.
So,
and again, you can't let your guard down.
Exactly.
That third day you go in, that storm's got surprises for you.
Exactly. So, every mission is different, and you've always got to be on your toes in this business.
And just as we wrap up, I know there's no in-flight service, but what about food and bathroom? Obviously, there's got to be some provisions up there.
Food and drink is bring your own.
So it's really economy.
So I always have my big water bottle with me because you're up there for 8 hours. You want to stay hydrated. Snack-wise, typically I'll try to bring sandwiches. Apples are some of my favorites. Just little things to tide me over. And then the bathroom. There is a bathroom on board. It's certainly one of the smaller and smellier bathrooms that you can find. But it is functional.
Yeah. It does what it's supposed to do.
Exactly.
It does what it's supposed to do. Well, listen, this has been really fascinating. I hope that the remaining weeks of the season don't hold any more surprises. But if it does, safe journeys, Nick. We really appreciate you sharing this unique plane ticket with us today on the Big Blue Marble podcast.
Happy to talk with you, and thanks for having me.
Nick Underwood has been my guest. He is a part of NOAA's Hurricane Hunter team. Well, how cool was that? As I mentioned earlier, that is a job designed for a certain person. It is so great to hear his passion. The work that they do is so important. Be sure to check out the pictures and video of what the interior of the plane looks like and the view from the cockpit. Pretty unique opportunity there. Also, a quick note, you have subscribed to our Big Blue Marble newsletter, right? Be sure to sign up. We're working away on November's newsletter. It'll be coming out in just a couple of weeks. It's free and it's a real easy read on some of the other really interesting stories about our changing planet. Obviously, we are limited on how much we can do on each podcast episode, so this is an extension to it. I really appreciate your support. You can subscribe to it at bigbluemarble.earth. One of the feature stories that we are working on is a new type of paint that could help reduce carbon emissions. Now, this is specifically for Europe, where many of the buildings, the heating and cooling, is powered by coal, oil, and gas. So this could be huge. It's a really interesting discovery, so be sure to check it out. Quick shout out to Cindy, Ian, Nichols, Forsyth Family Farms, and Laura for sharing and retweeting my podcast posts. It really helps get the word out. I post when I can on Twitter, Instagram, and on Facebook, show updates. You can follow me at Anwar Knight, that's for Insta and Twitter, and then Anwar Knight TV on Facebook, so I hope you do. But most importantly, please subscribe to the podcast and share it. Tell a friend, a colleague, and a family member, and if you can, leave a review. I'm always open to suggestions, comments, and ideas. Without you, there is no show. That's it for now. I'm Anwar Knight, wishing you a great day on the Big Blue Marble.
Hey, Dad, that was an awesome show.